A very similar situation, in some sense, is now unfolding in the north of Sumy region, where the Russian army constantly suffers one blow after another, each one more painful than the last. Apparently, something has gone completely wrong for them there. They've lost the settlements of Kondratovka, Alexeyevka, Andreevka, and now Yunakovka is in question. Yunakovka holds some important strategic value, and just yesterday there were reports that the Russians had been seriously pushed back from there. I wouldn't yet say they've been completely driven out, but they are now only holding on to some outskirts. Essentially, they're being forced out. Russian forces north of the city of Sumy are currently operating very unsuccessfully. Moreover, from the Ukrainian side, the Russians there are increasingly being hit by successful long-range strikes using HIMARS, aerial bombs, and long-range drones. Here's a quote from a Russian source today: Snagos. Snagost is a settlement in Russia's Kursk region. Snagos took 12 hits last night, precise and on target, under a warehouse. There are losses among the guys. The Ukrainians aren't hitting empty fields, they're hitting logistics, knocking out everything that supplies the front with ammunition. The same author goes on to write that what we're seeing now is the Ukrainian army simply cutting off all supplies to the Russians who have entered Ukrainian territory. All those armed men on the Russian side must be left without any supply at all. And Ukraine is now carrying out this work in a very deliberate and methodical manner. After Kondratovka, located almost on the border, was liberated by Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian armed forces pushed further north. And here's today's report. Novokonstantinovka. The Ukrainians have advanced, crossed the border, the sector is uncontrolled. In other words, Russian troops have already been driven out of Novokonstantinovka. Ukrainian forces are advancing forward and have even crossed the state border. The Russians do not control this section of the border. Movement is happening through it, and it's clear in which direction it's going. So what's going on? Well, here's where Igor Girkin comes in. Everyone remembers Girkin, I think, a war criminal and terrorist. He's currently in a Russian prison for insulting Alina Kabaeva, Putin's unofficial wife, who punished him by having him sentenced to 5 years in prison. In his recent letters from prison, he has been warning about what he considers the inevitable counteroffensive of the Ukrainian armed forces in one or more directions. He explains that Russia's summer offensive has stalled and exhausted its resources, leaving Ukrainians with no choice but to counterattack. And in Girkin's view, such a counterattack could be quite successful. In a way, Girkin has turned out to be right, because what we are now seeing in the Sumy direction partly confirms his words. There, the Ukrainian military, having created a competent defense, managed to grind down several tens of thousands of Russian troops, sending them either to the afterlife or to hospitals, and destroying practically all their equipment. The Russian army's strike force in the Sumy region has collapsed. It is no longer capable of breaking through Ukrainian defenses. Furthermore, in Sumy region, the entire command of the Russian naval infantry was destroyed, specifically the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, Putin's favorite. As a result, these units lost combat capability. The new commander of the 155th Brigade, Sukrab Akhmetov, is called both a fool and a butcher, hated by his subordinates. His orders are often ignored. Some units of the 155th Brigade simply say, "We're not going to follow his orders," and refuse to take part in the meat grinder assaults he sends them into. This makes the situation quite difficult for Russia in this sector. A few precise strikes on logistics, command posts, and Russian troop positions, and the entire Russian front there fell apart. I believe that many of these precise strikes on long-range targets and important Russian facilities in this area are proof of very successful Ukrainian intelligence work, which each week provides several sets of coordinates for high-value targets later destroyed by HIMARS or aerial bombs. Also, it seems the Russian command, due to recent failures, no longer sees the Sumy direction as particularly important and is sending its best reinforcements elsewhere, mainly to Donbass. As a result, Russian forces in this sector are left without manpower, without supplies, and without competent leadership. They can't go forward anymore, they can't plug the holes that have appeared in their defenses, and they're being pushed back. We already see them retreating around Novokonstantinovka, now even beyond the state border. So, as far as I understand, Ukrainian forces are once again on the territory of Russia's Kursk region and are expanding their zone of control there. For now, the Russian Federation can't do anything to stop this. Interestingly, the commander of Russia's North Group of Forces, this failing group in Sumy region, has been dismissed. Previously, it was General Lapen. He's been replaced by General Nikiforov, who became famous in the Russian army for not understanding how to use or even read maps on electronic tablets. He says, "I don't understand any of this. Give me a normal paper map and I'll work with that." The man is completely backward, stubborn, and unwilling to adapt to anything new. In a way, it's good that such a person is now in charge of Russian forces in this direction. Ukrainian sources say they've known Nikiforov for a long time. In 2014, near Debaltsev, he sent his troops into a senseless frontal assault, and they were completely wiped out by Ukrainian tank crews. So he's not particularly smart, but apparently he's a good parquet general, someone who builds his career well in Moscow, and because of that keeps getting new positions. Now, fortunately, this fool has been put in charge of Russian troops in the north, and I should note, a significant role in the overall success of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk direction is being played by the 80th Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian armed forces, Lviv Galician Brigade. This is important because, as far as I understand, the Russians are poorly equipped with night drones. They simply don't have enough of them, whereas Ukrainian troops do. This has given Ukraine a certain advantage, which, as we can see, they are actively exploiting.